It's pretty funny. It's happened twice now that my opponents have searched my deck in an attempt to search for an answer to what I am doing or for answers for another person's board, and then 2 turns later I ended up winning somewhat off the back of that. It's probably a coincidence, but it's funny that it happened twice. Hello everybody, I am Alex the Hugmonger, and I have long talked about my favorite deck in Magic the Gathering, or in Commander specifically, and that is my Chaos Wand deck. I really like casting spells and doing the Spellslinger thing. It is hard often to resist the urge of just playing a Storm deck, and I decided a couple of years back to try to make a deck that storms off of my opponent's spells, because that's at least a somewhat novel approach to the Storm archetype or Spellslinger archetype, and that is what the Chaos Wand deck is and does, is it attempts to cast your opponent's spells and pay off your opponent's spells. So here we are on Moxfield, taking a look at the deck itself, really there's a handful of things to really go over here. The first thing is that this is a commander agnostic deck. So commander agnostic decks tend not to care a whole lot about casting their commander. It's not like it's a particularly central part to our deck. This is a bracket 2, bracket 3 Grixis control deck. So we have 3 potential commanders in Don Andres the Renegade, in Marquesa, Dealer of Death, and Anne Hello the Painter. I haven't really landed on any specific one of the 3. My favorite is Don Andres the Renegade. Don Andres the Renegade is a 4/3 legendary vampire pirate for a Grixis and 1, so a black, red, blue 1. And the important text here is that whenever you cast a non-creature spell you don't own, you're going to create 2 treasures. This can be a very mana-hungry deck. With MDSCs, it has a total land count of like 39. So there's a lot of mana going on in this deck. However, for the longest time, I did run Anne Hello the Painter, who for 3 mana, so just Grixis, black, red, blue, is a legendary vampire assassin with Death Touch. And that was his main piece of text, is that he sat on the board early, kind of stopping my opponents from attacking me. Also, late in the game, he can sacrifice 2 power creatures in order to copy a spell. Marquesa the Death Dealer is also 3 mana. She's a 3/4. Whenever you commit a crime, which is pointing at your opponent in some way, targeting their creatures, spells, library, graveyard, exile, if you can target somebody's exile, and you get to look at 2 cards, put 1 in your hand, 1 in your grave. She's really good at filling up the grave, and that is part of our strategy, is wanting our grave to be full, but also wanting to draw cards. All 3 of these sort of serve to further the goal of the deck, which is to get to what I have here labeled as the device. So Chaos Wand wants to cast a bunch of spells, but if we turn off the tags, we will see this deck contains 14 instants and sorceries. So how do we get to our spells? That is what the device does. The device is a group of 6 artifacts or creatures that will cast our opponent's spells for us. We have Chaos Wand, Dazzling Sphinx, Grima, Sauron's Footman, and Wand of Wonder. Chaos Wand, Dazzling Sphinx, and Grima all cast spells from our opponent's deck. When Grima or Dazzling Sphinx hit, they will exile cards from the top of our opponent's library until they hit an instant sorcery, and then let us cast that for free. Chaos Wand does this, but as a activation for 4 mana. So we're going to be casting a single opponent's spells a lot in this deck, or we're going to be trying to. Wand of Wonder is sort of the bigger version of this. Every opponent's now exiling cards from the top of their library. This is at instant speed, and we'll roll a d20, and we cast between 1 and 3 of those spells. So we always have access to an instant or sorcery, as long as we have one of those 4 pieces. I have Panoptic Mirror in here as a potential Chaos Wand. This is because we have cards in our deck as well, instants and sorceries, that allow us to take cards out of our opponent's deck. That's what the emulating the device category does, is it's going to cast spells either from our opponent's graveyard or out of their deck. Looking at Chancellor of the Spire, and in specific Memory Plunder, allowing us to cast an instant or sorcery from an opponent's graveyard without paying its mana cost. At 4 mana, instant speed, this is an incredible value engine that will allow us to start looping an opponent's spell. If we're just casting it at instant speed, we have the ability to get it back with Call to Mind and Sorceress's schemes. But if we get it into the Panoptic Mirror, this is what's going to let us turn on turn cast the same spell or any specific spell that we want. A big thing about Memory Plunder and Chancellor of the Spire is that these don't exile the spell. You see, exiling cards from our opponent's graveyard can be great for shutting off their access to the card, but it also shuts off our access, and we don't necessarily want to do that. We can, for instance, Arcane Heist will exile the card after we cast it, and we can cipher this onto a creature so that we can keep going back and casting more and more spells out of our opponent's graveyard. Arcane Heist is particularly good here because even if you hit a specific player with a creature ciphered with Arcane Heist, you do not have to steal a spell from that player's graveyard. All of this allows us to cast a bunch of spells we don't own, similar to you might expect from Tasha, where she's casting spells out of her opponent's graveyard. She might even run something like Grima, Sauron's Footman, or Chaos Wand and Dazzling Sphinx to let her fill the graveyard with spells specifically so that she can cast more spells out of those graveyards. But this deck is specifically centered around the Wand of Wonder and Chaos Wand because these can be activated at instant speed, shifting us from just doing the Spellslinger thing to letting us play a bit of a control game. You see, I've been playing this deck for about 2 years, and one of the things that people will often say that's not quite true is that nobody runs enough removal. The thing is that you have a 100 card deck, and you don't have cards in your deck that say specifically cast a piece of removal. However, if I activate the Wand of Wonder, and most of your instants and sorceries are either ramp or removal, people don't tend to run a lot of card draw in their instant sorcery suite unless they're in green, in which case it's actually not particularly good for us because it's based on power, and our powers are going to be pretty low. So we, aren't going to get much card draw. Instead, we're going to get sweepers, we're going to get removal, we're going to get counter spells, we're going to get some ramp if there's a green player at the table. Every green player is running things like Farseek. And these are the things we can rely on. If you look at your own decks, what kind of instants and sorceries are you running? I bet you anything, it's targeted removal, it's sweepers, it's counter spells, tutors. A lot of people run tutors in their deck, which can be useful in this deck as well, because it will let us search for specific pieces. I have played a game where I cast an opponent's Enlightened Tutor about 4 times to get various pieces from the deck. So, how do we get access to, because we only have 2 or 3 Chaos Wands, or it says 6, but the big important ones are Panoptic Mirror, Wand of Wonder, and Chaos Wand. How do we actually get these pieces out of the deck? We do run tutors. Now, I think of this as a bracket 1 or 2 deck, but according to the bracket system as implemented on Moxfield itself, it has us labeled as bracket 3 because we run 1 Game Changer, Panoptic Mirror, and 3 total tutors, Reshape, Waterlogged Teachings, and Repurposing Bay. Repurposing Bay is in the deck to let us sacrifice our artifacts to get bigger artifacts back. This can be really important, allowing us to move through a chain of different artifacts turn on turn in order to get to our big 4-mana artifact, Wand of Wonder. It also allows us to, if we have a big artifact in play, if we have a 4-mana artifact in play, get to our Panoptic Mirror or our Correction tool. This is Synthesis Pod. So one of the downsides with something like Chaos Wand, Wand of Wonder, Grima, a Dazzling Sphinx, your random casts, is that you're not necessarily going to get a useful spell. I might cast a Sky Shroud Claim, I think it is, which is the card that lets you fetch for a forest out of the green player's deck. And unsurprisingly, I'm not running any forests in my Grixis deck. So, how do I make use of that? I'm going to use Synthesis Pod. Synthesis Pod is a blue artifact for 3 and a blue, Or, instead of paying a blue, you can pay 2 life. And then, after that point, you can pay 1 and a Phyrexian blue, or 1 blue and 2 life, in order to exile a spell we control that is on the stack. So this is an important piece of understanding for how Synthesis Pod works. The spell has to be on the stack. You're not exiling it from hand or on board, and you control the spell while you're casting it. So if I activate my Wand of Wonder and I collect 3 spells, I roll a 20 and can cast all 3, then I might get like a Sky Shroud Claim, a counter spell, and a kill spell. So what I'll do is I will cast the kill spell targeting a creature, I'll cast the Sky Shroud Claim, and I will cast the counter spell, probably targeting the Sky Shroud Claim, because I want the cast triggers, but also because it gives me access to all 3 as pod targets. Synthesis Pod is particularly important for making sure we can correct mid-cast. It's helpful when it comes to trying to find solutions. So, throughout playing the game over the past couple of years, I've found that 4 and 5 mana is where you'll find a lot of solutions to big problems. Like, you'll find your sweepers and your mass removals, generally speaking, or your big draw spells on 4 and 5, which actually happens to line up pretty well with not just the average ramp spells that you'll find in an opponent's deck, but also our commanders. You see, part of the use of Angelo the Painter and Marquesa Dealer of Death is that they're both 3 mana. 3 mana being 1 lower than that of the common sweeper at 4. If we're playing against a white deck, and we cast our commander, either Marquesa or Angelo, then we can pod our commander into the white deck, hoping to hit a 4 mana value sweeper. This isn't always going to happen because it turns out that 4 mana is also a very dense point on the mana curve. This is where a lot of bombs start occurring in Magic. So we might, instead of getting a sweeper, end up getting a valuable, powerful creature from our opponent's deck, which is a little bit inconvenient, but it does mean we get a powerful creature. Particularly, this is even worse with Don Andres the Renegade, because he's on 4 mana. On 5 mana, we tend to get the weird stuff. So if we look in our own mana curve, we'll see, 4 mana is pretty chunky here. There is all sorts of options, which makes hitting 4 mana pretty unappealing. At 5 mana, we get Panoptic Mirror, Rousing Refrain, Rionia, and Dazzling Sphinx. So we want to make sure that when we're picking out spells, we're talking to our opponents, because it's particularly important if you are trying to politics with the table in order to solve a problem at the table, that you are getting an understanding for not just your opponent's deck, but what they think of their deck. Asking an opponent, okay, do you have any sweepers in your deck? Is it on 4, 5, or 6 mana? Do you have one in hand? Because if not, I can go through your deck if you give me the number. And this is a big part of the conversation that I have when I have the wands on the table, and specifically when I have the wands and the pod. I go, if I have Chaos Wand in play, and let's say we have an aggro opponent who is particularly strong, and they swing in at someone or even the entire table. I look at everybody else and I go, how is your sweeper density in your deck? Sweeper density referring to how many sweepers do you run in the deck. So if you run like 1 or 2, it's not going to be great. If you run like 4 or 5, I'm going to point the wand at you, because you're the person who I'm most likely to hit that sweeper from. This allows me to maintain a lot of, quote, control over the game. Now, understand that control in this case is still random. It's still chaotic. It's not necessarily determined every single time. And it's a big part of understanding how this deck functions and why I class it at probably bracket 2. Despite the tutor density, this is more or less an exhibition of the concept of what a Chaos Wand is and sort of the iterative process of making and improving a Chaos Wand. Particularly, I do want to talk about some of the other stuff in the deck because we have the how do we invent the wand? We have some ways of protecting it with Trade Post, Esoteric Duplicator, and Pia's Revolution, which all allow us to get back the Chaos Wand if it's destroyed, or if we have to sacrifice it using Trade Post, or if we have to sacrifice it using Repurposing Bay, this allows us to get either a token copy using Esoteric Duplicator, or get it back using Trade Post or Pia's Revolution. We don't have ways to pull it out of the graveyard other than Trading Post, so you will want to keep that in mind. Sometimes it's more important to get the Trading Post using the Repurposing Bay than it is to actually get a wand. Other important things is how do we improve the Chaos Wand? So we have a handful of ways of improving the Chaos Wand here, and we're going to do this through untapping everything as much as we can, as often as we can, because we have things like Forensic Researcher, Irith the Healing House, Kelpie Guide, and Vizier of Tumbling Sand. This is 4 untappers that allow us to untap any permanent. So early in the game, we can use this to ramp ourselves into our bigger spells, although they're on 3 mana, so you're ramping into 5 at that point, and we won't actually have that many 5-drops, I don't think. But it does allow us to untap our big mana rocks, make bigger swings as they become an option, casting into our planeswalkers, which allow us to get more value, such as Chandra Host Beacon, which allows us to copy any instants and sorceries we cast, so we're like improving how the Chaos Wand works. We also have like Tezzeret, Betray of Flesh, Osgood, and Forensic Gadgeteer, which allow us to have more mana available for paying into the Chaos Wand, either by such as Forensic Gadgeteer and Tezzeret, decreasing the cost of activating the wands. So Tezzeret reduces the cost of activating the first artifact per turn. In our case, it's almost always going to be the wand. Forensic Gadgeteer does the same thing, but reduces it by 1 for all artifacts we activate. So every time we activate a wand or crack a clue, which is a thing we want to do a lot of in this deck. We have things like Trail of Evidence and Osgood Operation Double, which comes in, makes a non-legendary token of itself, and when we cast a spell from anywhere other than our hand, we're going to investigate. But why do we want to make so many clues? It is because we run Clock of Omens. If you're not familiar, Clock of Omens allows us to tap 2 artifacts to untap an artifact, and this is what's going to let us really storm off using the Wand of Wonder and Chaos Wand. We're going to activate the Wand of Wonder or Chaos Wand, tap 2 clues, untap it, tap 2 clues, untap the mana to activate it, and do this over and over again. But we're talking about storming off, so how do we actually storm here? We have Swarm Intelligence, which allows us to copy every spell. We have access to Thousand Year Storm, which gives our instants and sorceries that we cast Storm or Pseudo Storm, copies it for every instant or sorcery cast. We have Rawl, Crackling Wit, whose ultimate ability gives every instant and sorcery actual Storm. An important note on this is that Storm and Thousand Year Storm both copy for spells that were cast already this turn. If you're using Wand of Wonder and casting 3 spells, they are all cast at the same time, so they will not have been cast before the spell for the turn. In order to pay this off, we have Professor Onyx, we have Rawl, Storm Conduit, and we have Ryonia, the Fire Dancer. These are what's going to give us damage off of the back of our spell casting. Professor Onyx drains each of our opponents for 2, and we gain 2 life whenever we cast or copy an instant or sorcery. Rawl, Storm Conduit, when you cast an instant or sorcery or copy it, you deal 1 damage to target opponent or planeswalker. And Ryonia, or at the beginning of combat on our turn, technically, we create X copies of target creature, where X is 1 plus the number of instant and sorceries we've cast in a turn. So we do have the ability to make tokens. We also have some non-legendary creatures in here, such as Chancellor of the Spires, who we can treat as big beaters to copy with Ryonia, so that we can kind of get in with a fleet of Sphinxes. We also have the Lost and the Damned, which pays us off for casting our opponent's spells. So when we activate the Chaos Wand, Wand of Wonder Grima, or Dazzling Sphinx, or even Synthesis Pod, this is going to give us a 3/3 red spawn. They're pretty good to copy with Rionia, if nothing else. So a big part of understanding how the Chaos Wand deck works is, like I said, to understand how people play Magic the Gathering, and specifically Commander. People run a lot of removal in their deck. Some people will run a little bit of burn, a little bit of card draw, a little bit of ramp, but mostly I think what you'll find, if your opponents are running a Mardu deck, they're going to be running like Crackling Doom, Inevitable Defeat, or even just like Go for the Throat or Shieldred's Edict. You're going to find a high density of efficient removal in your opponent's decks, and that is really how this deck functions. Is it operates on the assumption of consistent removal, counter spells, sometimes draw, sometimes ramp, and I think more frequently than draw, you're going to be getting tutors. So if you are interested, the deck list for Chaos Wand should be in the description. This, like I said, has been a flyover of my Chaos Wand deck. Hopefully I didn't ramble too fast. I recorded like an hour-long version of this, and I wanted to really cut that down. So hopefully I didn't really overlook anything. Oh, Curse Recording is a bit of a meme in the deck. So the goal with this is you tap Curse Recording, you untap it using your Clock of Omens and all of your clues and everything, and you do that 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, and then you activate the wand in order to I refer to it as the hand-cranked storm generator. It is a very silly meme, and I really want to kill someone using a stormed a hand-generated storm using Curse Recording. You don't actually tend to cast that many instants and sorceries throughout the game because other players do tend to run fairly high-impact spells. You'll run into some absolutely wild circumstances. But that's about it. I'm interested to see what you guys think of Chaos Wand and this sort of deck techie thing. I can do tours of my other decks. I worry that people may not be particularly interested in deck techs for like very casual decks. This is not a deck tech for something that is trying to win the game on turn 3. It doesn't even really get off the ground until turn 5. And mostly the reason that Professor Onyx, Ralstorm Conduit, and so on are in here, Ranu would still be in here, she's really fun. But the reason they're in here is because I had a lot of opponents sort of complaining that, hey, you need to be able to close out the game more reliably, and I tried like gutter snipes and stuff like that, and they just weren't that interesting in the deck. But let me know what you think about more casual deck techs, and if you are interested, I can do more of these involving my other like 5 decks, because I enjoy these. I've done the anti-deck tech videos where I just rambled about how I kind of failed with a handful of decks, but I guess in the meantime, have a nice day.